I am Alexandra, a 33 years old woman. My life was transformed completely when I met Jonathan. I first met him shortly after I had graduated from university and had embarked on my career at a publishing house. Despite his profession as an architect, Jonathan also pursued writing poetry as a leisure activity and contributed to a feature article that I was responsible for at the time. Jonathan was gentle and kind, like a ray of sunshine. I was naturally drawn to his sincerity. We started dating, and 2 years later, we got married. Jonathan became successful in his career, amassing substantial assets like real estate and vacation homes, yet he never flaunted his wealth. We led a modest and happy life, and when our son William was born, my happiness reached its peak. The moment William looked up at me with his eyes, which are identical to Jonathan's, the world seemed to shine. To be honest, my relationship with my family was not great. My parents always doted on my sister Brittany, leaving me feeling somewhat isolated and neglected. Brittany was free-spirited and always the center of attention. In contrast, I continuously strived to meet my parents' expectations, always feeling compared and distanced. Jonathan was the one who truly loved me for who I was. He always affirmed me, and the time we spent together with William was truly a treasure. We would spend weekends at our country house and celebrate William's birthdays with a homemade cake. Those were simple yet warm days. However, our happiness was abruptly taken from us when Jonathan was diagnosed with cancer. William was just 5 years old then. I couldn't believe it at first. It was unthinkable that he, in a picture of health, was being consumed by illness. I nursed him desperately, clinging to a miracle, but the disease was relentless. Jonathan was quietly, yet surely, weakened and eventually left us behind. The sense of loss was immeasurable. I couldn't believe the reality unfolding before me, and I found myself overwhelmed with tears day after day. Surprisingly, my parents reached out to me during this time. Despite the distance I had always felt, they supported me after Jonathan's death. My mother would come over daily to look after William, and my father helped with various arrangements. Slowly, we began to rebuild our bond as a family. And then, the day of Jonathan's funeral came. Despite being overwhelmed with grief, I was praying for his soul. Many friends, acquaintances, and relatives had come quietly to say their farewells. The entire venue was enveloped in a solemn atmosphere when suddenly, the sound of heels clicking dramatically disrupted the silence. Turning around, I saw Brittany, dressed in black, with her noticeably pregnant belly entering the venue. A murmur spread through the attendees, who stared at her in surprise. Brittany walked straight towards me and looked at me with tearful eyes. "Everyone, please listen," she exclaimed suddenly, silencing the room. With a voice shaking from emotion, she declared, "There's something I must say today." As relatives and friends focused on her, Brittany steadied herself with a hand on her belly and then announced, "This child is Jonathan's." At that moment, the room froze. Faces of disbelief, people gasping, and a murmur spreading through the crowd. I was utterly stunned and could only stare at Brittany. "Jonathan loved me. Please believe that he wanted to protect this child." At those words, the attendees began to murmur loudly. "That's absurd. Unbelievable." Voices rose in unison. Relatives exchanged glances, and friends showed shock. Everyone present struggled to hide their astonishment. My mother rushed to Brittany and gently embraced her shoulder. "It's okay, Brittany. You don't need to say anything more," she said. My father, frowning, added quietly, "We understand what you've gone through. No one is going to blame you at a time like this." Both positioned themselves protectively in front of her, glancing at me as if fully accepting and defending her statement was the most natural thing to do. Moreover, Brittany, in tears, cried out, Believe me, Jonathan and I were in love. This child is the proof. As I watched Brittany, I felt something inside me crumble. I didn't want to believe it, but her words sharply pierced my heart. A mix of anger and sadness tightened around my chest. I wished it was some sort of joke. The funeral ended with an indescribable atmosphere. Attendees left with heavy hearts, each carrying their thoughts. I stood by the altar until the very end, staring at Jonathan's photograph. When the crowd had left, I took a deep breath and turned around to find my parents and Brittany still there. My mother looked at Brittany with tear-streaked eyes, and my father's brow was deeply furrowed. I slowly approached them and said with a trembling voice, "There's something we need to discuss. Just us." My voice echoed in the now quiet venue, with only the four of us remaining. I decided to have my son return home earlier with the babysitter. Brittany appeared a bit tense, but my mother nodded quietly, and my father sat down without saying a word. I took a deep breath and looked at Brittany. "Is what you said earlier true?" Brittany wiped her tears and nodded. "It's true. Jonathan was planning a future with me." I clenched my fists tightly. "Then why haven't you said anything until now?" Brittany looked down and spoke in a hoarse voice. "I was scared. But I couldn't keep it hidden anymore." I was at a loss for words and looked at my parents, curious about their expressions. I hesitantly asked, "Don't tell me. You knew about this?" My parents looked at each other, and a heavy silence hung in the air. My mother answered with a trembling voice, "We knew. Brittany told us 6 months ago." "What?" I was stunned. "Why didn't you say anything?" My father exhaled deeply. "Brittany said she intended to tell you herself, so we kept silent." "I think Jonathan is also responsible," my mother continued. "He should have been honest with you and told you that he loved Brittany." My heart was shattered into pieces. It seemed that my parents, whom I thought had reconnected with me, were not really on my side. A burning pain surged within my chest. Then, Brittany stood up and said in a confident tone, "Jonathan loved me, and the child in my womb carries his blood. Therefore, his estate should also be rightfully distributed to this child." I gasped. There was no hint of hesitation on Brittany's face. She spoke calmly and with conviction, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Jonathan was preparing for our future. This child has the right to receive it." My parents looked down, unable to say anything, and I kept my fists clenched as I stared at Brittany. Anger welled up from deep within me, and I asked in a trembling voice, "Are you serious about what you're saying?" Brittany smiled. "Yes, I am serious. This is what Jonathan wanted." At her words, something inside me crumbled loudly. I took a deep breath and clenched my trembling hand. "We have no way to verify what Jonathan wanted. Now is not the time to discuss the inheritance. Today is a day to remember Jonathan." Brittany started to say something, but my mother quietly shook her head. "That's enough. Let's go home today." In a heavy silence, we each held our thoughts close as we slowly left the venue. Several days after Jonathan's funeral, the family gathered at the family home. We were there to open Jonathan's will, and everyone assembled with a mix of anticipation and anxiety about its contents. We decided to have a lawyer present just in case, to avoid any disputes over the inheritance. The will was undoubtedly written in Jonathan's handwriting, and its contents surprised us all. The first shock was the section about my sister, Brittany. Jonathan clearly stated in the will that Brittany had made inappropriate advances towards him several times. Brittany tried to approach me inappropriately. Even when I clearly refused, she did not stop, it stated, casting doubts on her actions. Moreover, Jonathan emphasized that if Brittany ever claimed a share of the estate, her claims would be baseless. The most shocking part was, if she claims her child is mine, please take a DNA test. Jonathan had also sternly warned us against harboring any doubts. The will then moved on to the crucial part about the estate. Jonathan had explicitly left everything to me and our son. Brittany has no inheritance rights, it stated, with reasons more clearly outlined than our family had anticipated. At that moment, relief and surprise filled my heart. While I couldn't deny that I had been wary of Brittany, knowing Jonathan's true intentions through the will reassured me that proper order was maintained in our family. Everything Brittany has said was a lie, I finally said. I felt as if something had been cleared inside me. At the same time, Brittany's face contorted, and her eyes filled with anger. "This is a lie," Brittany exclaimed. Her voice trembled, but it was filled with desperate resistance. Her face turned red, and I did not miss how she lost her composure. "A lie? Then we should just get a DNA test," I replied calmly. At those words, Brittany's face paled even more, and I could see her struggle for words. "Brittany." My mother hesitantly spoke, but her voice clearly intended to defend her. "If what you are saying is true, there is no need for a DNA test. Alexandra, you should stop accusing Brittany like this." My mother looked up at Brittany as she said this, then glaringly turned to me. My father also chimed in with a sneer. "That's right. There must be some mistake in this will. It's impossible for Brittany to lie. Stop making our Brittany anxious." His voice contained a heartbreaking anxiety, but it was clear that he harbored suspicions against me. Neither my mother nor father believed anything I said from the start. This realization painfully intensified, making the days we had spent together feel unjustly tainted. Without giving up, I kept my gaze fixed on the increasingly pale Brittany, silently searching for a breakthrough within her. The lawyer quietly observed the situation. Brittany turned away, and a silence ensued. Her eyes seemed to mix anger and despair. The lawyer, while quietly reviewing the documents, stated, "We will proceed according to the will. If Brittany wishes to object, she must take legal steps." Brittany did not react to the lawyer's words and continued to tremble with her head bowed. After a while, she muttered in a voice that seemed to squeeze through her teeth, "I understand. I will take the DNA test." Her voice was surprisingly calm, yet I sensed an uncontrollable turmoil swirling beneath it. A few days later, it was decided that the DNA test would be conducted by a specialist arranged by the lawyer. Brittany and I would meet again at the hospital. On the day of the test, Brittany calmly told me, "The results of this test will clarify everything. Be prepared." I did not respond to Brittany's defiance. As the days waiting for the DNA test results passed, I wrestled with conflicting emotions. I wanted to believe the words Jonathan had written in the will, yet I was anxious about the possibility that Brittany's child might indeed be Jonathan's. Despite wanting to trust the love and trust Jonathan had left for me, Brittany's reactions left me restless, and I spent sleepless nights consumed by these thoughts. A week after the test, I received a call from the lawyer and went to his office. As I entered the room, the lawyer was waiting. "The results are in," he said after a moment, looking at me. "The child is not Jonathan's." At that moment, a great sense of relief spread through my heart. I had been worried about what would happen if Brittany's claims were true, but that anxiety was now gone. However, a fierce anger rose within me because of the damage Brittany's lies had caused. "She was lying, wasn't she?" I stated firmly. The lawyer nodded. "Yes. As the results show, Brittany has completely falsified her testimony. Her claim that she was pregnant with Jonathan's child was a total lie." I immediately contacted Brittany. When the call connected, I could hear Brittany's cold voice. "What do you want?" There was no hint of fear or perturbation in her voice. She sounded as if everything was going as she had planned, calm and collected. The results of the DNA test are out. It has been proven that you lied, I told her calmly. I immediately sensed the impact of my words on her. A lie? What about it? Brittany showed a moment of surprise but quickly regained her composure. But I was indeed loved by Jonathan, she insisted again forcefully. At her words, my anger surged alongside my astonishment. It was unbearable how she still tried to justify her position. Are you still saying that? I listened to Brittany's voice over the phone, squeezing out my words. I could not allow her to continue lying. Every word she spoke amplified my anger. Then, let's settle this in court, I said calmly, yet with resolute determination. Without waiting for her response, I hung up the phone. Afterwards, I consulted with the lawyer about the possibility of suing Brittany. After careful consideration, the lawyer informed me that we could sue her for defamation and attempted fraud regarding the estate. Without hesitation, I chose that path. No matter what excuses she might make, the truth was clear. I was determined to fight Brittany. Together with the lawyer, I organized the evidence we had gathered to prove Brittany's false testimony. We prepared everything needed for the case: the will, the DNA test results, and evidence supporting the claims that Brittany had made advances toward Jonathan. All the pieces were in place. Utilizing all these elements, I resolved to pursue legal sanctions against Brittany. Just then, my mother called. Are you serious about suing Brittany? Please reconsider. My mother's voice trembled. While feeling mixed with confusion and bewilderment, what she said momentarily pained my heart, but I quietly exhaled and tightened my grip on my phone. Mom, I was hurt by Brittany on the day of Jonathan's funeral. I'm sure Jonathan would have been upset to be sent off in such a way. I just can't forgive Brittany. My voice trembled not only with anger. I was incredibly frustrated that Jonathan's final moments were shrouded in such chaos. My mother tried to say something, but I gently pulled the phone away from my ear. And so, the battle in court began. In the oppressive atmosphere of the courtroom, I took my seat and met Brittany's gaze. She appeared calm, but her eyes betrayed a hint of panic and anxiety. She stood at the witness stand without making eye contact with me, which fueled my anger even more. The judge entered, and the trial commenced in silence. My lawyer began by methodically presenting evidence that Brittany had made advances toward Jonathan. It was emphasized that Jonathan's will mentioned Brittany's repeated approaches and instructed for a DNA test to be conducted if any disputes arose over the inheritance. Brittany claimed she was pregnant with Jonathan's child, but the DNA test results clearly showed this to be false. The lawyer's words echoed in the courtroom. Brittany slightly grimaced at these words but quickly regained her composure. It was then my turn to testify. I clenched my slightly trembling hands, took a deep breath, and stepped forward. To calm myself, I recalled words Jonathan had said during his lifetime. Don't forget to believe. Love transcends all. With those words in my heart, I explained my position step by step. I could not believe what Brittany was saying. My relationship with Jonathan was strong. Yet, she claimed the child in her womb was his and demanded the inheritance, even on the day of his funeral. The only thing I can believe is the will Jonathan left behind. That was his true feeling. After my testimony, Brittany's lawyer stood to contest it. She emphasized how close Brittany and Jonathan supposedly were and tried to cast doubt on my testimony. However, my statements and the evidence matched each other, and the judge calmly dismissed her objections. Next, it was Brittany's turn to testify. There was a slight tremble in her eyes, but her demeanor remained arrogant and cold. I loved Jonathan, and he loved me. That's why I thought I should receive a share of the inheritance. At those words, I was simply astonished. If it was about love, why was there a need to lie? I was deeply infuriated. If Jonathan had loved you, it would have been mentioned in the will. What you are saying is just a selfish lie, I firmly responded. As the courtroom battle continued, I felt a gradual lightening of my heart. Brittany seemed to realize that no matter how many lies she piled up, the truth could not be hidden. Finally, the time for the verdict arrived. The judge spoke gravely. In this case, the defendant's false testimony has been proven, and she is hereby ordered to pay a fine and damages for defamation and attempted fraud. Furthermore, a restraining order is issued against the defendant, prohibiting any approach towards the plaintiff and her family. At that moment, I let out a deep sigh of relief. Brittany's misconduct was formally recognized, and she was to be held accountable for her actions. It was over. All the evidence was on our side, and Jonathan's estate would assuredly be passed on to my son and me. The trial was concluded, and with the legal sanctions imposed on Brittany, my heart finally began to settle. I decided to cut ties with Brittany and my parents, and move to a new city with my son to start a fresh life. While moving away from our familiar home brought some anxiety, it also instilled a new hope in me about living in a new place. My son started attending a new school, made friends, and gradually regained a stable routine. I too began searching for a job, slowly reclaiming myself. The days I fought to protect Jonathan's estate and honor now felt like a distant past. Although the anger and sadness from those days of the trial still lingered in my heart, I had sorted them as things of the past and decided to look forward. Just as Jonathan had loved me, I vowed to love and cherish my son wholeheartedly. Amidst all this, I occasionally heard about what had become of Brittany and my parents. Around the time I started my new life, a relative told me that Brittany was suffering from loneliness. It seemed that the relatives had come to know about the lies she had told at the funeral. Her lies being exposed led to criticism from everyone, and she began to be distanced by all. Her social credibility was completely lost due to her false testimony and attempted fraud, so she was gradually avoided by friends and others around her. However, it was said that she hadn't shown any signs of remorse and continued to display her vanity. Initially, Brittany had been making payments for the damages, but over time, these payments started to falter, accumulating into debt. Her life became increasingly difficult, and she had to take out other loans to manage her debt repayments. No matter how much she borrowed, the original amount of the damages remained unchanged, and she was reportedly cornered. When I heard this, I felt an indescribable surge of emotions, but everything was a result of her own lies. Hearing that she was paying the price for her actions brought me a slight sense of relief. Moreover, my parents also continued to defend Brittany's actions, losing the trust of our relatives as a result. I heard that the relatives grew cold towards my parents, gradually distancing themselves. My parents were now isolated and financially struggling. To assist with Brittany's debts, my parents had incurred a significant amount of debt themselves, worsening their own financial situation. Eventually, trying to help Brittany meant they could no longer support their own lives. Hearing this, I was neither surprised nor shocked, rather, I thought it was expected. By continually defending Brittany, my parents ultimately got entangled in her issues. Despite my confronting Brittany's lies and actions, my parents sided with her and continued to defend her. Knowing what had become of Brittany and my parents, I felt that everything had finally been judged justly. I had completely sorted things out in my mind by cutting ties with them. I had no intention of helping them, nor did I plan to have any interaction with them in the future. I was convinced that this was the best path for me and my son. Our bond as a family had already been broken, and I felt that was all their own doing. One day, while playing in the park with my son, I looked up at the sky. I was determined to cherish the future that lay ahead with my son, not letting past events sway us, and to forge a new path. Smiling, I spoke to my son. From now on, let's move forward together, just the two of us. My son responded energetically. Yeah, Mom. I'll support you for Dad too. At that moment, I was certain. We no longer need the entanglements of the past like Brittany and my parents in our new future. We have a new bond based on love and trust. And I truly feel that is the most important thing we need to pave the way for our future.